Welcome back to this, our final session of our faith group series, Ripped from the Headlines, the chaos of Judges and the chaos of today. We really hope this has been a great series for you. These stories are weird, but then we are living in a weird world, aren't we? So we hope that they've spurred some good conversations for your faith groups. Now, generally, we like to save the best story for last, but unfortunately, when it comes to the book of Judges, well, we've saved the worst for last. And by worst, it is no understatement to say that the story that we are looking at today might be one of the worst and most disturbing stories in all of Scripture. And maybe, before we dive into the story that begins in Judges chapter 19, we should see where it all ends up. It doesn't necessarily spoil the ending for you, but it does show where all of this is going. The very last verse in the entire book of Judges, from chapter 21, verse 25, ominously states, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It was everyone for themselves. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, a lot could, and a lot did. But Judges chapter 19 starts off innocently enough. We find that there was a Levite who had a concubine. A concubine is basically a glorified mistress, not quite a wife, but close to it. In fact, the Levite is still called her husband. We learn in verse 2 that the concubine was unfaithful to him, and that she left him to go live with her father in Bethlehem. But instead of becoming angry or vengeful, verse 3 tells us that the Levite arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. Our story begins like a Hallmark movie here, with hopes of sweet and loving reconciliation. Biblically, it sounds a lot like the life of Hosea the prophet, whose own wife was unfaithful, but who, at God's command, went to her and spoke tenderly to her and took her back. But as we'll see, the story parallels a far darker episode from Bible history. As the Levite approaches Bethlehem, he is greeted enthusiastically by the concubine's father, who welcomes him into his home and shows an over-the-top hospitality to him. The husband stays for 3 days, eating and drinking and being merry with the concubine's father. When on the 4th day, the man and the concubine prepare to leave, well, the father insists that he continues to stay. Have another night. Enjoy some more eating and drinking and merriment. The same thing happens on the 5th day. But that evening, instead of staying another night, as the father-in-law was trying to insist, this man and his concubine make a departure. Of course, it's late in the day, and it's even later when they pass by the city of Jebus. It's getting dark, and the servant suggests that maybe they should go into town and spend the night. But the Levite refuses. He was unwilling to spend the night in a foreign city, for Jebus was not occupied by one of the tribes of Israel. And therefore, it could not be trusted. That might come back to haunt him. Instead, they push ahead for the city of Gibeah, which is a city in Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, so it was full of friends, one would think. Except when they get to the town square, well, no one took them in, and it was getting darker. Finally, An old man from the hill country of Ephraim was passing by. He had a place in Gibeah, and he took the Levite and his party to his house, saying, "Peace be with you. I will care for all of your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." Now, at this point, if this was a movie, this would be where some ominous music would start playing in the background. But, it seems like things are going fine. It says that the old man brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and he washed their feet, and they ate and drank. But then, as they were making their hearts merry, it says, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And there's where things turn sideways real quick. "Bring out the man who went into your house," they demand, "that we may know him." Now don't be fooled. They don't want to get to know the Levite in a polite company sort of way. This wasn't an invitation to play some board games and do some icebreaker or get to know you questions. No, they wanted to know him in the biblical sense, if you know what I mean. They wanted to have sex with him. And this is where our story gets PG-13 really quick. Well, the old man refuses, thankfully. But just when you start to have some respect for this old guy, he lays out a horrible alternative. "Behold," he says, "here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing." Excuse me? Did he just propose what I think he proposed? Did he just offer up his own daughter and the concubine of his guest to these sexual assailants? And would the Levite just stand back and allow all of this? I mean, after all, remember, he pursued this woman that he cared for to bring her home. He sought her out and spoke tenderly to her. How would he respond to this? Well, it turns out, not well. Not well at all. And it's maybe one of the most incomprehensible verses in the Bible. It says, "But the men would not listen to the old man, so the Levite seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go." What in the world? Well, and it gets worse. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house, where his master was, until it was light. And his master rose up in the morning. I really hope he got a good night's sleep with all that racket outside, right? And when he opened the doors of the house and went out on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. She's lying there with her hands touching the door, the threshold of the door. This is horrible. And you might expect a horrible reaction from the Levite here, or at least a sorrowful reaction. After all, this was, again, the woman he'd pursued. Well, lower your expectations. He said to her, "Get up, let us be going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. "Quit your dilly-dallying there. What are you lying around for? We got to get going," he says to this poor dead woman. "Are you dead? Oh, that's inconvenient." I mean, can you think of a more despicable character in all the Bible at this point? Well, if you had any ounce of goodwill for this Levite still, check out what he did next. He got home, entered his house. Maybe he went to the kitchen, you know. And he took out a knife. Maybe he had a cutting board, I don't know. And taking hold of his concubine, he divided her, limb by limb, into 12 pieces. And then he sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. How'd you like to get that UPS delivery? Oh, look, a package, great. Oh, my goodness. Oh, honey, it's for you. I mean, yikes. This is crazy. Well, the story doesn't end there. As the tribes of Israel check their mail, they behold such horror, and they all rally together to punish the city of Gibeah. All the tribes, but one, that is, the tribe of Benjamin sides with Gibeah. And so it's 11-on-1 here in a tragic battle. Interestingly, the book of Judges, in Judges chapter 1, opens with a battle, a similar kind of battle, but in that case, it's all the people of God against a foreign adversary. Here, however, we come to the end of this sorrowful book, and we find the people of God fighting against each other. And boy, if that doesn't sound like the church at times, doesn't it? There's nothing sadder than when God's people are divided and fighting against one another. Actually, there is one thing sadder than that. It's even sadder when God's people are fighting against each other in front of an unbelieving world. For all to see, whether it's on the battlefield or on the news or on social media. What a witness. Not. Well, the Benjamites, it turns out, put up a heck of a fight, and they defeat the united tribes in the first two battles, making the united tribes so desperate that they actually pray. They make sacrifices, they fast, and they bring out the Ark of the Covenant. And so in their third battle, they finally win. In fact, they dominate the Benjamites, decimating the tribe of Benjamin so much that the tribe is practically exterminated. Of course, then the tribes start having regrets. And in typical fashion, they blame God for what they did. You see, they had made some hasty vows. No one learned Jephthah's lesson here. The first vow was that no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to a Benjaminite. But then they quickly realized that this meant certain doom for the tribe of Benjamin. That meant they would lose one of the 12 tribes, and apparently they really liked even numbers. But the second vow was, him who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah shall certainly be put to death. In other words, the second vow said that if someone didn't come fight against Benjamin in that battle, that they would be killed. Well, it turns out that the men from Jabesh Gilead didn't show up for the battle. So you know what I'm thinking? Free wives for the Benjaminites, that is. So those outraged Israelites who nearly wiped out the entire tribe of Benjamin because the Levite's almost wife was killed, go and wipe out an entire camp of people, killing all of the men and the wives and sparing only the virgin women so that they could give them to the Benjaminites. And you can't make up how horrible this story is. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Well, a few comments about this story as we wrap up. Obviously, the parallels to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah are striking here. Only this one is perhaps worse You see, in that Genesis 19 account, at least the angels got Lot and his family out of the doomed city. In this account, the Levite throws his family out to the mob. And there's no mention of God in all of Judges chapter 19. In chapters 1 through 18 of Judges, God is mentioned 204 times. In chapter 19, not once. By contrast, in this story, the word man is mentioned 70 times. You can see the problem here. Well, why is this story in the Bible? And why would we want you to read it? Well, as scholar James Bajan observes, from time to time, it can be good for us to think long and hard about exactly what is wrong with our fallen race and the extent of which it has fallen. It's good for us to recognize our bondage to sin, as well as what happens when God withdraws his voice of correction from a society. What if we don't listen to what God says? But he also notes a difference between our Levite in this story and a priest in a later story. You see, the Levite began well in our text, but he did not end well. Yet when men surrounded Jesus, our great high priest, and his disciples in the darkness of Kidron Valley and demanded blood, Jesus did not hand his disciples over as the Levite did his wife. Instead, he stepped forward and he said, "If you seek me, let these men go their own way." What kind of man would step out into the darkness of Sodom in order to protect others? What kind of man would give himself up to suffer humiliation for the sake of an unfaithful wife? Well, our bridegroom would, for his bride, the church. You see, in the days of Judges, Israel did not only lack a Christ-like leader, she lacked Christ-like people and priests who would sacrifice themselves for the sake of others. Well, on this side of the cross, we have our Christ leader. We have Jesus. So the question is, what kind of people will we be? I'll let you talk about that. Thanks for joining us on our Faith Group series. God bless your discussions, and we'll see you in church.